The sun is high and unforgiving over the port city of Ostia on this Tuesday, June 12th, in the year 115 AD. It is a little past 11 in the morning, and the temperature is already climbing toward a sweltering 96 degrees. If you were standing on the dusty streets outside right now, you would feel the heat radiating off the cobblestones, smelling the salty air coming in from the Tyrrhenian Sea, and the dust kicked up by the thousands of people moving through the market. But we aren't out there on the street. We are stepping into the cool, shadowed interior of one of the most important buildings in the city, the Forum Baths. This isn't just a place to get clean. For the Romans, the baths were the center of the universe. It was where you went to exercise, to hear the latest news, to make business deals, and to show off your social status. Today, we are going to explore a room that might seem a bit strange to us, but to a Roman man, it was as familiar as his own dining table. We are walking into the *Forica*, or the public latrine. As your eyes adjust to the dimmer light, the first thing you notice is the architecture. It is beautiful. The floor is made of intricate black and white mosaic tiles, depicting sea creatures and mythical scenes. The walls are lined with smooth, white marble, reflecting the little sunlight that filters in from high above. It is surprisingly quiet in here, aside from the gentle sound of splashing water, or at least, it should be gentle. There are no private stalls here. In Rome, relieving yourself was a public act. It was a communal experience. Imagine sitting on a long, continuous marble bench that runs along 3 walls of the room. This bench is not just a slab of stone. It is a masterpiece of engineering. It is heated in the winter by the same hypocaust system that warms the bathing pools, so it's never shockingly cold. Holes are carved into the marble at regular intervals, about 20 of them in total. Right now, about half of them are occupied. We are here to meet a man named Lucius. Lucius is 34 years old, a grain merchant with a worried look on his face and a skull case tucked firmly under his left arm. He is dressed in a crisp white toga that indicates he is a Roman citizen, a free man of some standing. But if you look closely, you can see the stress in his eyes. His business has been hit hard by a bad harvest in Egypt, and his grain ships are late. He is one bad deal away from losing everything. Today is his big chance. He is waiting for Gaius Valerius, a shipowner who controls the largest fleet in Ostia. Gaius is the kind of man who can make or break Lucius with a simple nod of his head. They have arranged to meet here in the latrine because it is neutral ground. It is a place where men are relaxed, where their guard is down, and where deals are often struck over the sound of running water. Lucius walks across the mosaic floor, his sandals making a soft slapping sound against the stone. He is sweating slightly from the heat outside, but the air in here is cool and refreshing. He takes a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. The smell of the room is distinct, a mix of damp stone and the sulfur scent of the water flowing beneath the floor, but it is clean. Or at least, it is supposed to be. He spots an empty seat near the back of the room. This is seat number 12. It is a prime spot because it is close to the window, offering a draft of air, and it has a bit more space on the left side. More importantly, it is the seat next to where Gaius Valerius usually sits. Lucius knows this because he has been tracking Gaius's routine for weeks. He sits down carefully, arranging his toga so it doesn't bunch up behind his knees. In front of the bench, there is a shallow channel of water that runs continuously along the floor. This is the key to the Roman system. Fresh water flows from a spout at one end and circles around the room before draining out the other side. This water serves 2 purposes. It washes away the waste that falls through the holes in the bench, and it provides a place for the users to rinse the communal sponge sticks. Let's talk about that sponge, because it's a fascinating detail. In this era, they didn't use toilet paper. Instead, there is a bucket of water mixed with vinegar and salt sitting near each user. A sponge is attached to the end of a stick, and after you are finished, you clean yourself with the sponge, then rinse it in the channel of water flowing by your feet. It sounds strange to us today, but to a Roman, sharing this sponge was a sign of trust and equality. It was a shared resource among citizens. Lucius dips his fingers into the cool water of the channel, testing the flow. It is moving briskly. Good. He arranges the sponge stick on the armrest of the marble bench. He checks his appearance in the small polished metal mirror he has brought with him, checking to make sure his hair is tidy and his face isn't too flushed. Suddenly, the heavy wooden door creaks open, and a hush falls over the room. Gaius Valerius has entered. He is a large man, older than Lucius, perhaps in his 50s. He wears a tunic bordered with a wide purple stripe, marking him as a senator. He moves with the confidence of a man who owns half the city. He is accompanied by a young slave who carries a jar of perfumed oil. Gaius doesn't rush. He greets a few acquaintances, shaking hands and slapping shoulders. He spots Lucius in seat number 12 and raises an eyebrow. He walks over, his footsteps heavy on the stone. "Lucius," Gaius says, his voice deep and booming. "I see you secured the best seat in the house. The light is good for reading, isn't it?" Lucius stands up immediately to show respect. "It is an honor to see you, Gaius. Yes, the light is quite illuminating. Please sit." Gaius smiles and settles into seat number 13, right next to Lucius. He waves his slave away, indicating he wants privacy for this conversation. The two men sit down on the cold marble. For a moment, they just sit there, shoulder to shoulder with the other men of the city, listening to the gentle trickle of the water. "So," Gaius says, leaning forward slightly and resting his elbows on his knees, "you tell me the grain from Alexandria is finally on its way. Tell me why I should believe you this time, Lucius. My ships are sitting idle in the harbor. Time is money. Picture this: Rome, the eternal city, the beating heart of an empire. But beneath the shimmering marble of its temples and the grandeur of its forums, a different world pulsed. A world of business, ambition, and the ever-present stench of reality. Our story begins here with a man named Lucius Caecilius Eucundus. Not a senator, not a general, but a businessman, an Argentarius, a banker, whose fortunes rose and fell not on the battlefield, but in the smoky backrooms of taverns and the lavish atriums of the wealthy. Lucius was a man on the verge of greatness. He wasn't born into the patrician elite, those families whose names were etched into the very founding of Rome. No, Lucius had carved his own path with grit, a sharp mind, and a healthy dose of audacity. He'd started small, financing local craftsmen and lending to desperate legionaries. But now, he was on the cusp of his biggest deal yet, a deal that would elevate him from a mere moneylender to a true titan of Roman commerce. His target was Gaius Appuleius Diocles, a man whose wealth was the stuff of legend. Gaius wasn't just rich, he was obscene. A former charioteer who had amassed a fortune that could rival the emperor's own, he was now looking to diversify, to turn his winnings from the Circus Maximus into something more permanent. He was looking for investments, and Lucius had the perfect one: a shipping venture to bring exotic spices and silks from the farthest reaches of the East. It was risky, yes, but the potential profits were staggering. Lucius had spent months laying the groundwork. He'd called in favors, bribed port officials, and commissioned the finest maps. He had prepared contracts on expensive papyrus, his figures checked and rechecked by his most trusted scribe. Everything was perfect. The meeting was set for his own domus, a statement of his success. Not a sprawling villa on the Palatine Hill, but a respectable, lavishly decorated home in a bustling commercial district, a testament to new money and ambition. The day of the meeting arrived, hot and sticky, as summer days in Rome often are. Lucius was a bundle of nerves, dressed in a toga of the finest bleached wool, the purple stripe of the equestrian order sewn proudly on its edge. He paced his atrium, the central courtyard of his home. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the sound of water trickling from the fountain in his impluvium, the basin designed to catch rainwater. He had spared no expense. Sumptuous mosaics depicting tales of the gods covered the floors, and vibrant frescoes adorned the walls. He had even hired musicians to play softly in the background. Finally, the announcement came. Gaius Appuleius Diocles had arrived. Lucius smoothed his toga one last time, plastered a confident smile on his face, and went to greet his guest. Gaius was intimidating. He was a large man, built like the powerful horses he once raced. His face was weathered from years in the sun and dust of the racetrack, and his eyes held a shrewd, calculating glint. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He strode into the atrium, his entourage of freedmen and bodyguards trailing behind him, and surveyed the room with a critical eye. Lucius led him to the triclinium, the formal dining room, where they would finalize the deal. Couches were arranged around a low table, laden with fruits, cheeses, and wine from the finest vineyards of Campania. Lucius began his pitch. He spoke of new trade routes, of galleys laden with cinnamon and pepper, of profits that would make them both legends. He was passionate, persuasive. Gaius listened intently, occasionally asking a sharp, pointed question, testing Lucius's knowledge, his resolve. The tension in the room was palpable. Lucius could feel it. A deal was close. So close he could almost taste the celebratory wine. He presented the final contracts, unrolling the papyrus with a flourish. Gaius leaned forward, his eyes scanning the detailed script. This was the moment. The culmination of months of work, the gateway to a new life. And then it began. A low, guttural gurgle from the corner of the room. Lucius tried to ignore it, raising his voice slightly to cover the sound. But it grew louder, a sickening, wet rumbling that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the house. A foul odor, faint at first, began to creep into the air, muscling its way past the fragrant incense. It was the smell of the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer, on a bad day. The smell of waste, of decay, of the city's underbelly. Gaius wrinkled his nose. "What is that infernal noise, Lucius?" Lucius forced a laugh. "Ah, the city has a life of its own, Gaius. The pipes, you know." But his explanation was cut short. The gurgling became a churning, and then a dark, brackish water began to seep from a drain in the floor. It wasn't just water. It was a filthy, stinking slurry, carrying with it unspeakable things. It spread across the beautiful mosaic floor, a tide of filth creeping towards their couches. The musicians stopped playing. The servants froze, their faces masks of horror. The air, once filled with the promise of riches, was now thick with a nauseating stench. Gaius shot to his feet, his face a thundercloud of disgust. He looked down at the encroaching sewage, then at Lucius, his eyes burning with contempt. "The gods themselves show their displeasure," Gaius boomed, his voice echoing in the now silent room. "This is a foul omen. To conduct business in a house that vomits its own filth. Never." Lucius was speechless. He watched, horrified, as the murky water lapped at the legs of the table, threatening to ruin the expensive papyrus contracts. He wanted to scream, to apologize, to explain that this was a freak occurrence, a problem with the city's plumbing, not a sign from the heavens. But the words wouldn't come. Gaius didn't wait for an explanation. With a final look of utter revulsion, he turned on his heel. "We are done here," he spat, not just at Lucius, but at the entire disastrous scene. He stormed out of the triclinium, his entourage scrambling to follow, trying to avoid stepping in the disgusting mess that was now flooding the room. Lucius stood alone, ankle-deep in the foulest water imaginable. The scent of spices and silks had been replaced by the overpowering stench of the sewer. The promise of a legendary fortune had washed away in a tide of public waste. He looked down at the ruined mosaic, the beautiful depiction of Jupiter and Juno now submerged in filth. His grand venture, his ambition, his future, all of it seemed to be swirling down the drain with the backed-up contents of the Cloaca Maxima. The deal wasn't just off. It was dead, drowned in a spectacularly Roman fashion. For in a city built on gods and omens, a backed-up sewer was more powerful than any contract. Lucius was left standing in the ruins of his dream, a stark reminder that in Rome, for all its glory and sophistication, you were only ever one plumbing disaster away from total ruin. This story, while fictional, highlights a very real part of Roman life. The Cloaca Maxima was a marvel of engineering, but it wasn't perfect. Blockages and backups were a constant problem, a smelly, unpleasant fact of life for the city's residents. It shows how the practical and the superstitious were intertwined in the Roman mindset. A business deal could be sealed not just on numbers, but on the perceived favor of the gods, and a sign could come from anywhere, even the sewer. It's a fascinating glimpse into the world that existed beneath the marble and grandeur, a world of ambition, commerce, and the ever-present risk of something going terribly wrong. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this trip back in time, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more stories from history. See you next time. The stench was overwhelming, a foul mix of sewage and shattered pride. Here I was, Lucius, once a respected citizen, now standing thigh-deep in the filth of Rhone's grandest latrine. The marble benches, usually a place for gossip and business, were now just islands in a rising sea of murky water. Panic was a contagion spreading faster than the flood. Men, their togas hitched up awkwardly, scrambled and slipped, their shouts echoing off the ornate walls. And then I saw him, Marcus, a sneer plastered across his face, enjoying my humiliation. He'd orchestrated this, I was sure of it. This failure was meant to be my public ruin, but I wouldn't let him win. Not today. I pushed through the chaos, the cold, dirty water sloshing against me. My goal was the main drainage grate, a dark iron maw at the far end of the room. The water level was rising fast, threatening to spill out into the forum itself. I spotted a splintered wooden pole, probably from a broken piece of scaffolding, floating nearby. I grabbed it. It was heavy, slick with grime, but it would have to do. Reaching the grate, I took a deep breath, the foul air burning my lungs, and jammed the pole into the clogged darkness below. It was like pushing against a solid wall. I strained, my muscles screaming in protest. The sun beat down through the high, open ceiling, my face turning red with exertion. This wasn't just about clearing a blockage. It was about my future, my name, my very survival in this unforgiving city. With a final desperate roar that came from the depths of my soul, I put every ounce of my strength into one last heave. The pipe had to clear. It just had to. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this glimpse into ancient Rome, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. The moment the stick cleared the grate, the pressure released, but not in the way he wanted. A bubble of foul-smelling gas erupted from the drain, followed by a gurgle that sounded like a beast dying. Then, nothing. The water level didn't drop. In fact, because he had disturbed the blockage, a wave of dirty water splashed back up at him, hitting his chest and face. Lucius sputtered, wiping the foul water from his eyes. He could taste the sulfur. He gagged. It was hopeless. The blockage was too big. The physics of the sewer were against him. The force of the water from the baths was too strong for one man with a stick to fight. He threw the stick into the water. It floated away, useless. He leaned his head against the slimy marble wall. He could hear the murmur of the crowd outside in the atrium. They could smell the trouble. He could hear voices speculating about what was happening. If Gaius was out there, hearing those rumors, Lucius's chance was slipping away by the second. He had to go after Gaius. He couldn't fix the room, but he could still try to fix the relationship. Lucius pushed himself away from the wall and splashed toward the exit. Every step felt heavy. His wet toga clung to his legs, weighing him down. He felt the judgment of the few remaining men in the room. They saw a wet, smelly merchant who had tried to play engineer and failed. He had lost his dignity. He reached the doorway and stepped out into the atrium of the baths. The air here was fresher, filled with the scent of olive oil and charcoal from the heating fires, but it was still crowded. People were turning to look at him. They saw his soaked clothes and smelled the stench that clung to him like a shadow. They stepped back, creating a circle of empty space around him. Lucius scanned the room. He didn't see Gaius at first. Then he spotted him near the fountain in the center of the courtyard. Gaius was washing his hands and his sandals, scrubbing furiously as if trying to scrub away the memory of the latrine. Lucius took a deep breath, ignoring the smell of himself, and marched forward. The crowd parted, looking at him with a mix of horror and fascination. It was like Moses parting the Red Sea, if Moses had been covered in sewer water. "Gaius!" Lucius called out. Gaius froze. He didn't turn around immediately. He slowly finished rinsing his hands, shook the water off them, and turned. His face was hard. He looked at Lucius, taking in the sight of the ruined toga and the wet hair. "Lucius," Gaius said, his voice cold, "I see you have decided to join the rest of us in the land of the living. I assume the room is repaired." Lucius stopped a few feet away. He didn't want to get too close. "Not yet," he admitted, "but it will be. The blockage is stubborn, but the city engineers are on their way." Gaius raised an eyebrow. "Engineers?" "I saw no engineers, Lucius." I saw you flailing around with a stick like a boy chasing frogs in a pond. Lucius felt his face burn with shame. I was trying to help. I was trying to save the deal. The deal, Gaius repeated. He laughed, but it was a humorless sound. You think a deal is worth my dignity? You think I care about your grain shipment when I can still smell that rot on your clothes from 10 paces away? It's just a smell, Gaius, Lucius pleaded, his voice cracking. The grain is good. The numbers are solid. Don't let a clogged pipe destroy a partnership that could make us both rich. Gaius stepped closer. He was taller than Lucius, and he used his height to intimidate. He leaned in, and Lucius saw the disgust in his eyes. It wasn't just about the smell. It was about control. Gaius was a man who controlled his environment. Lucius had let the environment control him. It is not just a smell, Gaius whispered, pointing a finger at Lucius's chest. It is a sign. In Rome, order is everything. The aqueducts bring water, the sewers take it away, and the Senate makes the laws. When the sewers back up, it means the natural order of the world is broken. And you, Lucius, you are standing there representing the chaos. Lucius opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. He knew he couldn't win this argument with logic. Gaius wasn't speaking logically. He was speaking emotionally. He was speaking from his gut, and his gut was telling him to run away. I have an appointment at the basilica, Gaius said, stepping back and smoothing his dry, clean tunic. I am going to do business with men who bathe in water, not in filth. Do not follow me, Lucius. Not until you have learned to distinguish yourself from the common muck. Gaius turned and walked away. He moved through the crowd, and people bowed their heads to him, respecting his power and his cleanliness. Lucius stood alone in the center of the atrium. The fountain behind him bubbled happily, a cruel contrast to the stagnant pool he had just escaped. The silence was deafening. No one wanted to talk to him. No one wanted to be near him. He was the merchant who had tried to fix the sewer and failed. He was a joke. He looked down at his scroll case. It was dry, safely tucked under his arm, but it felt heavy now, like a stone weighing him down. All his plans, all his calculations, all his hopes for the future were contained in those scrolls. But none of it mattered if he couldn't get people to stand in the same room with him. Lucius walked slowly toward the exit of the bathhouse. He needed to get out of here. He needed fresh air. He needed to think. As he stepped out of the building and onto the busy street of Ostia, the heat hit him again. The sun was directly overhead now. The street was packed with wagons, merchants, and slaves. The noise was overwhelming, shouting, hammering, the clatter of wheels on stone. But Lucius felt like he was in a bubble of silence. He found a low wall near a bakery and sat down. He put his head in his hands. He felt like crying, but he was too old for tears. He was a Romo. He was supposed to be stoic. He was supposed to endure. But endurance was hard when you were covered in sewage. In the sprawling city of Rome, where marble gods watched over 1 million souls, lived a man named Gaius Valerius. If you had wealth, Rome was your playground, and Gaius had wealth in abundance. His ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean, laden with silks from the east, amber from the north, and exotic spices that scented the air of his grand villa on the Esquiline Hill. He was a man who knew the value of everything, but the worth of very little. His world was one of cold, hard denarii, of contracts sealed with a ruthless handshake, and of ledgers where human lives were often just another entry in the debit column. Gaius wasn't born into this life. He came from humble beginnings, the son of a potter in a dusty provincial town. The memory of hunger was a sharp, biting thing that never quite left him, even when his table groaned under the weight of roasted peacock and wine from the finest vineyards. This fear of returning to poverty became the engine of his ambition, driving him to work harder, to be smarter, and to be more ruthless than any of his competitors. He'd foreclosed on desperate farmers, exploited indebted craftsmen, and sold grain at inflated prices during famines. Each coin he earned was a brick in the wall he built around his fearful heart, a wall that kept everyone out, including his own family. His wife, Livia, was a gentle soul who saw the boy he once was, but that boy was now buried under layers of cynicism and greed. His son, Lucius, a bright and sensitive young man, saw only a father who measured his worth in gold, a father who had no time for a game of knucklebones or a story before bed. Lucius recoiled from his father's world, finding solace in philosophy and poetry, much to Gaius's open disappointment. "There are no denarii in Homer," he would scoff, pushing his son further away with every sharp word. The turning point, as it so often is, came without warning. It arrived on a ship, not carrying silks or spices, but carrying a plague. The Black Fever, they called it. It swept through the ports and crept into the heart of Rome, a silent, unseen invader that no wall could stop. At first, Gaius saw it as another opportunity. He hoarded grain and medicine, planning to sell them at astronomical prices when the city's desperation peaked. His warehouses were full, while his neighbors' cupboards grew bare. Then the fever crossed his own threshold. It took his wife, Livia, first. She faded quickly, her last breath a whispered plea for him to look after their son. Gaius was stunned, adrift in a sea of grief he didn't know how to navigate. The fortress of his wealth was useless against this enemy. Before he could even process his loss, the fever claimed Lucius. He held his son's hand, a hand he had so rarely held before, and watched the light leave his eyes. In that final, shattering moment, Lucius didn't look at him with anger or resentment, but with a profound, heartbreaking pity. The silence in the grand villa was deafening. The echoes of his wife's laughter and his son's quiet footsteps were gone, replaced by a hollowness that mirrored the one inside his chest. Gaius wandered through the empty rooms, his reflection in the polished marble floors showing a man he no longer recognized, a king of a gilded, empty kingdom. His wealth, the very thing he had sacrificed everything for, was now just a pile of meaningless, mocking metal. He walked out of his villa and into the streets of a suffering Rome. For the first time, he truly saw the city. He saw the faces of the hungry, the sick, the desperate. He saw the same pain he felt reflected in 1,000 other eyes. These were the people he had exploited, the ones he had considered mere numbers in a ledger. They were mothers, fathers, and sons, and they were all sharing his nightmare. Something inside him broke. The hard shell he had built around his heart for decades shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. The fear of poverty was replaced by a new, more terrifying fear, the fear of dying as the man he had become. Driven by a desperate need for redemption, Gaius threw open the doors to his warehouses. He didn't sell the grain. He gave it away. He distributed the medicine he had hoarded, working alongside physicians he once would have snubbed. He converted a section of his villa into a makeshift infirmary, using his fine linens for bandages and his expensive wines to clean wounds. He worked tirelessly, day and night, his soft merchant's hands becoming calloused and raw. He didn't do it for praise or recognition. He did it because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. It was his penance. He held the hands of the dying, offering what little comfort he could. He spoon-fed broth to feverish children, seeing his own son's face in each of them. He listened to the stories of the people he helped, stories of love, loss, and resilience. In their shared humanity, he found a connection more valuable than any trade deal. The city that had once been his marketplace became his community. One evening, exhausted and sitting on the steps of his now crowded villa, a young woman whose family he had saved from starvation approached him. She didn't have any money to repay him, but she offered him a small, crudely carved wooden bird, a toy her father had made. It was a simple, worthless thing by any monetary standard. Gaius took it, and as his fingers closed around the wood, he felt a warmth spread through him that all his gold had never provided. He looked at the woman, and for the first time in years, he smiled a genuine, heartfelt smile. Gaius Valerius never regained the vast fortune he had given away. When the plague finally receded, he was left with just his villa and a modest income. But he was no longer the man who lived in fear. He had lost his family and his fortune, but in the process, he had found something far more precious, his own soul. He spent the rest of his days not as a merchant of goods, but as a patron of his community, remembered not for the wealth he had amassed, but for the kindness he had shown. He learned that the true measure of a man is not the coin in his purse, but the light he brings to others in the darkest of times. And in the quiet evenings, he would often hold a small wooden bird in his hand, a priceless reminder of his redemption. Thanks for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel for more tales from history. We'll see you next time. The moment Lucius stepped onto the marble floor, the wet slap of his sandals echoed through the hall. The conversations nearby stopped. Heads turned. The smell hit the crowd a second later. It was a weird, confusing mix, the overwhelming stench of sewage mixed with the sudden, powerful wave of fresh roses. It was disorienting. Lucius scanned the room. He spotted Gaius Valerius standing near the statue of the Emperor Trajan. Gaius was talking to two other men, ship owners like himself. He looked clean, cool, and in control. As Lucius began to walk toward him, a guard stepped into his path. The guard was a big, muscular man holding a wooden stave. "Halt," the guard barked. "You cannot come in here. The basilica is a place of law, not a stable. Go to the river and wash." Lucius didn't stop. He held the vial up, letting the scent drift toward the guard. "I have business with Senator Valerius. It is urgent." "I don't care if you have business with Jupiter," the guard growled, grabbing Lucius's arm. "You smell like a plague." Gaius Valerius heard the commotion. He turned around. When he saw Lucius, his jaw dropped. He couldn't believe his eyes. Here was the merchant, standing in the middle of the most important building in the city, covered in filth, causing a scene. "Let him go," Gaius said, his voice carrying across the hall. "I want to see this." The guard released Lucius's arm, but kept his stave raised. Lucius straightened his toga as best he could and walked the last 20 paces to Gaius. The other ship owners backed away, pulling their tunics over their noses. "Lucius," Gaius said, shaking his head, "you have lost your mind. You are dragging the filth of the Phareca into the halls of justice. This is beyond anything I have ever seen." "The city is rotting today, Gaius," Lucius said clearly. He didn't stutter. He didn't apologize. He spoke the words he had practiced in his head on the walk over. "Literally rotting. The sewers are broken. The baths are a mess. But we are not citizens of the sewers. We are merchants." Gaius laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "Look at you. You are a citizen of the sewers right now. You have proven my point. You cannot rise above the chaos. You are drowning in it." "Am I?" Lucius asked softly. He lifted the vial of rose oil. With a slow, deliberate movement, he poured a single drop onto his own wrist. Then he dipped his fingers into it. The scent exploded in the air between them. It was so strong it cut through the heavy air of the basilica. It masked the sewage smell completely for the men standing right there. "This oil comes from a province I have never seen," Lucius said. "It is made by hands I will never shake. It traveled thousands of miles on ships, just like yours, to get here. It costs a fortune, but it is worth every sesterce because it changes reality." Lucius stepped closer, invading Gaius's personal space. Gaius flinched, expecting the smell of the sewer, but instead he smelled roses. It was shocking. "You were right, Gaius," Lucius continued. "The world is messy. The pipes break. The ships are late. The grain rots. That is the chaos. But our job is not to live in the mess. Our job is to smell of profit. Our job is to bring the garden to the swamp." Gaius stared at Lucius. He looked at the vial. He looked at Lucius's filthy, wet toga, and then he looked at Lucius's eyes. What he saw surprised him. He didn't see a desperate beggar anymore. He saw a man who had been humiliated, who had been knocked down into the dirt, and who had stood up and turned himself into a king. The other ship owners were watching. They were confused, but they were also impressed. It took guts to walk in here smelling like that. It took brilliance to use a bottle of perfume as a business weapon. Gaius slowly lowered the hand that was covering his nose. He took a breath. He smelled the roses. He smiled. "The garden to the swamp," Gaius repeated. "That is poetic and dangerous." "It is business," Lucius said. "My ship, the Isis, is coming. The wheat is real. The price is fair. The deal is the same as it was this morning. The only thing that has changed is the smell, and I just fixed the smell." Gaius let out a long breath. He laughed, but this time it was a genuine sound. He reached out and placed a hand on Lucius's shoulder, ignoring the dampness of the toga. "You are a fool, Lucius," Gaius said, but there was warmth in his voice. "You ruined your clothes. You scared half the city. But you are a stubborn, brilliant fool. I like stubborn men. They are the ones who survive." Gaius turned to his secretary. Bring me the wax tablet. We have a grain shipment to buy. The tension in the room vanished. The murmuring started up again, but this time it was excited. People were pointing at Lucius. He wasn't an outcast anymore. He was a legend. He was the man who had conquered the stench. Lucius stood there while Gaius wrote out the contract. He stood perfectly still, holding his wrist up, letting the scent of roses waft over the transaction. It was a deal worth millions in today's money, but the ink wasn't even dry before Lucius felt the real reward. It was the feeling of redemption. He had taken the worst day of his life and turned it into his greatest victory. As soon as the tablet was signed and handed over, Gaius looked at him. "Now go," Gaius said. "Go home. Burn that toga, scrub yourself until you bleed. And then, Lucius, come back and see me when you smell like a human being again." "I will," Lucius said, bowing his head. "Thank you, Gaius." Lucius walked out of the basilica. The sun was still hot, but the air felt lighter now. He had won. But as he walked down the steps, he didn't feel like celebrating with a shout or a jump. He felt a quiet peace in his chest. He walked back toward the baths. He wanted to see the latrine one more time. When he arrived, the scene had changed completely. The slaves had finally cleared the blockage. The engineer, a man named Titus, had managed to open the auxiliary grate. The water was flowing again fast, clean, and clear. Picture this: Rome, the glorious heart of an empire, a city of marble and gold. Living in this sprawling metropolis is Lucius, a merchant whose fortune is as vast as his pride. He walks the forum with his chin held high, his expensive toga sweeping the polished stones. He sees himself as a master of his own destiny, a true Ramang, a builder of civilization itself. For Lucius, the world is divided into the strong and the weak, the civilized and the barbarian, and he, of course, is on the winning side. One afternoon, after sealing a particularly lucrative deal, Lucius feels the familiar call of nature. He heads to one of Rome's famous public latrines. These weren't just toilets. They were social hubs, places to catch up on gossip while sitting side by side on long marble benches. Lucius finds an empty spot, settles in, and continues to bask in the glow of his own success. He glances at the men beside him, a senator, a baker, a soldier, all reduced to the same basic human function. And then it happens. A tiny, furry creature scurries out from the plumbing beneath him. A sewer rat. It dashes across the wet floor, and in a moment of pure instinct, Lucius yelps. He yelps and reflexively lifts his feet, nearly toppling off his seat. The sudden, undignified movement causes a ripple effect. The senator next to him startles, the baker chuckles, and the soldier lets out a hearty laugh. In that instant, Lucius's carefully constructed image of power and control shatters. His face flushes red with embarrassment. He, Lucius the great merchant, brought to his knees well, almost by a simple rat. He quickly finishes his business and hurries out, his dignity in tatters. But as he walks back into the bustling streets of Rome, something shifts within him. The laughter in the latrine echoes in his mind, but it's no longer just humiliating. It's humanizing. He looks at the grand temples, the mighty Colosseum, the intricate aqueducts. He had always seen them as symbols of Roman dominance, of their separation from the chaos of the natural world. But now he sees something else. He sees that beneath all the marble and order, life persists. The rat in the latrine, the weeds pushing through cracks in the pavement, the ever-present dust of this city, they are all part of the same story. Lucius realizes that civilization isn't about conquering nature. It's about coexisting with it. It's a constant, humbling negotiation. His pride had blinded him to a simple truth. No matter how high we build our walls or how grand our titles, we are all, at our core, vulnerable beings sharing a world with creatures big and small. The rat wasn't a barbarian invading his civilized space. It was just another resident of Rome, surviving just like him. From that day on, Lucius walked through Rome with new eyes. He still traded his goods and made his fortune, but the arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of wonder and humility. He understood that true strength wasn't about being untouchable. It was about resilience, about getting back up after a fall, and maybe even learning to laugh at yourself when a tiny rat reminds you of your place in the grand, messy, beautiful tapestry of life. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales from history.